The clock on the wall showed 11:23 p.m. on New Year's Eve, 2019. Roberto Gonzalez, 74 years old, sat alone in his dark living room in Miami's Little Havana, tears running down his weathered cheeks as fireworks exploded outside. His grandchildren hadn't called. Nobody was coming. He thought his life was over. Then, at exactly 11:37 p.m., someone knocked on his door, and everything changed forever. Roberto had come to understand loneliness as a physical sensation, like cold water filling his chest cavity drop by drop, day after day. The small yellow house on Calle Ocho that had once echoed with laughter, with the sounds of his wife Carmen's cooking, with grandchildren running through the hallways, now held only silence and the tick of an old clock. The television showed Times Square celebrations, young people embracing and counting down to midnight in cities around the world. But Roberto had muted the sound. He couldn't bear to hear their joy. His tailor workshop, which occupied the back room of the house, had been closed for nearly 2 years. The vintage Singer sewing machine that had been his mother's gift when he left Cuba in 1967, one of the few possessions he'd managed to bring with him, sat under a dusty sheet. Bolts of fabric lined the walls, untouched. His measuring tapes hung on hooks like forgotten memories. The scissors his beloved Carmen had given him for their 10th anniversary rested in a drawer, their blades growing dull from disuse. Roberto's hands, calloused from 50 years of precise work, trembled slightly now as he wiped his eyes. At 74, he'd survived leaving his homeland with nothing, survived poverty and discrimination, survived building a successful tailoring business from scratch, survived even Carmen's death 6 years ago. But this loneliness, this slow fade into invisibility, felt like dying while still breathing. His 2 sons visited when they could, busy with their own lives and careers. But it was his grandchildren, Diego and Sofia, who had truly broken his heart. When they were small, they'd spent every weekend in his workshop, fascinated by the sewing machine, delighted by the costume pieces, eager to hear his stories about Cuba and the old days. Diego, now 17, had once been captivated by how fabric could transform into art. Sofia, now 15, had loved trying on the vintage pieces her grandfather created. But as they grew into teenagers, everything shifted. The last time they'd visited, 3 months ago for his birthday, they'd stayed exactly 45 minutes. Both had spent most of that time staring at their phones, occasionally showing him screens filled with images and words he didn't understand. "Abuelo, this Snapchat filter is hilarious," Sofia had said, her face transformed by some digital effect that gave her dog ears. Roberto had smiled and nodded, but inside he'd felt ancient and irrelevant. "My Instagram Reels got 10,000 views," Diego had announced, as if this meant something profound. Roberto had congratulated him, though he had no idea what Instagram or Reels were. What Roberto didn't know as he sat there crying on New Year's Eve was that in 14 minutes, his entire life would transform, all because he'd choose to answer an unexpected knock. The doorbell's sudden chime at 11:37 p.m. made Roberto jump in his chair. His first instinct was to ignore it. Who knocked on doors this late on New Year's Eve? But curiosity and perhaps a deep-seated hope that maybe, just maybe, his grandchildren had come, made him push himself up from the chair, his knees protesting after hours of sitting. Through the small window beside the door, he saw 2 young people he vaguely recognized from the apartment building next door. The young man was tall and thin with carefully styled hair, and the young woman wore what looked like vintage 1920s clothing. Roberto opened the door cautiously. "Mr. Gonzalez," the young man said, his smile bright and genuine. "I'm Marcus, and this is Zoe. We live next door. We're really sorry to bother you so late, but Mrs. Rodriguez said you're a tailor who used to make costumes." Roberto blinked, surprised to hear English mixed with genuine enthusiasm. "Yes, I was a tailor. I am retired now." Zoe stepped forward, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Mr. Gonzalez, we're fashion students at Miami-Dade College, and we make videos for TikTok. It's a social media app where people post short videos. We're working on a project about 1920s. Roberto stood there, feeling the warm Miami night air on his face. Part of him wanted to refuse, to return to his chair and his loneliness. That part whispered that he was too old, too tired, too far behind the times. But another part, a part he'd thought was dead, stirred slightly. Someone wanted his skills. Someone valued what he could do. "I have not made costumes in a long time," he said slowly. "Maybe 2 years. But you still could, right?" Marcus asked hopefully. "Your hands still work? You still have your equipment?" Roberto looked down at his trembling hands, at the calluses from decades of work. "Yes," he said quietly. "I could still sew." "Mr. Gonzalez, this would mean so much to us," Zoe said earnestly. "We want to make authentic content, not fake stuff. We want to show real craftsmanship." Something in her voice, in their genuine respect, reminded Roberto of his grandchildren when they were younger, before the phones, before they'd stopped seeing him as someone worth their time. He found himself nodding. "Okay, you come back tomorrow, January 1st at 2 o'clock. We talk about what you need." After they left, Roberto stood in his doorway for a long moment. Then he walked to his workshop and turned on the light for the first time in months. Dust particles floated in the air like tiny stars. He removed the sheet from his sewing machine and sat down, running his fingers over the familiar metal. Even in retirement and loneliness, he'd maintained his tools, oiled the parts, cleaned the mechanisms, more from habit than hope. As Roberto sat there, touching his mother's sewing machine, he had no idea that this moment would lead to millions of people watching him work, to fame he never imagined, and to his grandchildren realizing too late what they'd been ignoring. Marcus and Zoe arrived exactly at 2 o'clock on New Year's Day, carrying notebooks and a tablet computer. Roberto had spent the morning cleaning his workshop, uncovering supplies, organizing thread spools. He'd even shaved and put on proper clothes instead of his usual worn cardigan. They sat in his small kitchen, and Roberto made Cuban coffee the traditional way, sharing knowledge as he worked. "When you make Café Cubano," he explained, measuring sugar carefully, "you must whip the first few drops of coffee with the sugar until it becomes a light brown cream, almost like caramel. This creates the espumate, the foam on top. Many people skip this." Marcus and Zoe watched, fascinated, as the dark espresso mixed with caramelized sugar created that perfect foam. As they discussed the Charleston dresses, Roberto found himself telling stories he hadn't shared in years. His mother had been young in 1920s. Havana had scandalized her parents by cutting her hair short and wearing those liberating dresses that women move freely. He showed them his sketches, and both students were genuinely impressed. Then Marcus pulled out his phone. "Mr. Gonzalez, would it be okay if we filmed you while you work? Not for posting yet, just to document the process and learn from it." Roberto hesitated. Being filmed felt strange. invasive. But these young people were respectful and genuinely interested. "Okay," he said, "but I work slowly. I am old." "Good work takes time," Zoe said simply. Over the next 2 weeks, Roberto worked on the Charleston costumes, while Marcus and Zoe visited almost daily. They filmed his hands as he cut fabric, as he pinned and measured, as the old singer machine hummed to life. Roberto found himself teaching as he worked, explaining techniques learned over 50 years. "When you cut fabric," he said one afternoon, his weathered hands moving with practiced precision, "you must respect the grain. See how the threads run. If you cut against the grain, the fabric will never drape correctly. Always, always." He showed them how to cut on the bias so fabric would move beautifully when dancing. As he attached fringe to the crimson dress, he shared another tip his mother had taught him. If you're working with fabric that frays easily, silk, delicate cotton, run a thin line of clear nail polish along the cut edge before sewing. Marcus and Zoe absorbed everything, asking constant questions. "Why do you measure twice? Why does thread tension matter so much?" Roberto answered patiently, finding joy in teaching that he'd forgotten existed. They also taught him about their world. "TikTok is basically showing people what you're interested in," Zoe explained one evening as they cleaned up the workshop. "You make short videos, usually under a minute. If people like them, they share them. Some videos go viral. Millions of people watch them. Why would millions of people watch a video of someone sewing?" Roberto asked, genuinely puzzled. "Because it's interesting, beautiful, teaches them something," Marcus said. "There's this whole community interested in slow fashion, craftsmanship, traditional skills. People are tired of cheap clothes that fall apart. They want to see real artistry." Roberto found this hard to believe but didn't argue. When he finally finished the costumes 3 weeks after that New Year's Eve knock, the results were stunning. 2 authentic Charleston dresses, one deep crimson with silver fringe, one midnight blue with gold sequins, both cut to move beautifully when dancing. Zoe actually cried when she tried hers on. "Mr. Gonzalez, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever worn. It fits perfectly." "It was made for you," Roberto said simply. "That is what a tailor does." When Marcus showed Roberto the videos they'd made of him working, Roberto barely recognized himself. He looked like a master craftsman, not a forgotten old man. But he had no idea what would happen when they posted those videos online. 3 days after the costume delivery, Zoe called Roberto's landline, her voice high with excitement. "Mr. Gonzalez, the video of you making the costumes got 50,000 views. People are asking where they can find you if you take commissions. Look at the comments." Roberto sat down heavily, stunned. 50,000 people had watched him sew. It seemed impossible. "I do not understand. People are hungry for authenticity, Mr. Gonzalez. You're exactly what they're looking for." That evening, Marcus and Zoe appeared at his door with a boxed smartphone. "Mr. Gonzalez, we got you a present. We've set it up with a simple plan. We want to teach you how to use it, how to see what people are saying." Roberto's first instinct was to refuse. He'd never wanted a smartphone. They seemed complicated and unnecessary. But the young people were so enthusiastic, and part of him was curious about these 50,000 people. He accepted. Learning to use the smartphone became one of the most frustrating experiences of Roberto's life. His fingers, so skilled with needle and thread, felt clumsy on the smooth glass. The icons made no sense. But Marcus and Zoe came every evening for a week, patiently teaching. "Here's an important tip for using smartphones," Zoe said during one lesson, noticing Roberto's frustration. "If the screen is too sensitive and you keep accidentally touching things, you can adjust the touch sensitivity in settings. Also, you can make the text bigger so you don't have to strain your eyes. These phones were designed by you." Marcus added practical advice. "Don't feel pressure to respond to everything immediately. That's a mistake young people make. We think everything is urgent. Take your time. Read carefully before responding. Quality is better than speed." Slowly, painfully slowly, Roberto began to understand. They created accounts for him, Roberto's Vintage Culture. They showed him how to see the videos. Roberto watched the view counts climb, 70,000 to 100,000. The comments overwhelmed him. People from around the world praising his work, asking questions, sharing stories about grandparents who'd been tailors. This is what real fashion looks like. Where has this man been all my life? This is a true master at work. One evening, Zoe said, "Mr. Gonzalez, people are asking if you take custom orders. Do you want to keep making costumes?" Roberto was quiet for a long moment. Then an idea came to him, something that blended his love of history with this strange new world. What if we mix old and new? Vintage styles, but with modern elements? He showed them sketches he'd been working on. A Victorian dress with neon fabric trim, a 1940s suit with loud lights in the pinstripes, a 1960s outfit with holographic material. Each costume tells two stories, past and present, and each needs a character, a full identity. Who would wear this? Where are they from? What is their story? Marcus's eyes went wide. "Mr. Gonzalez, that's brilliant. Nobody's doing that." She. Chato Titan. Elni. Dao. As Roberto's follower count climbed past 200,000, something else was happening that he didn't know about. His granddaughter Sophia was about to discover who her grandfather had become. It was a Tuesday afternoon in March, when Sophia Mitchell sat in her high school cafeteria in Coral Gables, scrolling through TikTok while eating lunch. Her friend Madison suddenly grabbed her arm. "Oh my God, Sophia, you have to see this video. This old guy making vintage costumes is amazing." Sophia glanced at the screen. Madison thrust toward her and froze. The old guy was wearing her grandfather's familiar worn cardigan. Those were his hands, weathered and wrinkled, but moving with incredible skill. That was his voice, accented and gentle, explaining technique. That's my grandfather," Sophia whispered. "Wait, what?" Madison grabbed the phone back and looked at the account name. "Roberto Gonzalez is your grandfather." "Sophia, he has 800,000 followers. He's TikTok famous." Sophia felt the cafeteria spin around her. 800,000 followers. Her grandfather? The one she and Diego visited twice a year for obligatory 30-minute stays. The one they treated as boring and irrelevant. She scrolled through his account with shaking hands. Video after video of her grandfather creating beautiful costumes, telling stories, teaching techniques. The comments were full of praise and admiration. "This man is a treasure. I would pay anything to learn from him. My grandmother was a seamstress, and watching this makes me miss her so much." Sophia felt something crack open in her chest, a terrible mixture of shame, grief, and sudden understanding. She'd been so caught up in her phone and social media, in getting views and likes, that she'd completely missed that her own grandfather, sitting in a house 3 miles away, was this talented, this interesting, this valuable. She called him immediately, her hands shaking as she dialed. When he answered, she could barely speak through her tears. Abuelo? It's Sophia. I need to ask you something. Is Roberto's vintage cocher you? There was a pause. Then her grandfather's voice, careful and soft. Yes, my amor. That is me. Abuelo, everyone at my school is talking about you. My friend showed me your videos. You have 800,000 followers. Her voice broke completely. And I didn't even know. I haven't called you in months, and you're doing all this amazing work, and I had no idea. Abuelo, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Sophia, it is okay. No, it's not okay. Sophia was crying openly now, and her friends were staring, but she didn't care. Diego and I have been terrible. We only came on holidays, and even then we were on our phones. We made you feel like you were boring, like you didn't matter. But, Abuelo, you're the most interesting person I know, and we just... What Sophia didn't know was that her call was about to give Roberto something even more valuable than viral fame. It was about to give him back his family. Can Diego and I come see you? Today. Right now? Please, Abuelo. Sophia begged. Roberto felt his throat tighten with emotion. Yes, he said softly. Yes, you can come. An hour later, Diego and Sophia burst into his workshop. They didn't knock. They had keys but hadn't used them in months. Both teenagers threw their arms around their grandfather, both crying, both apologizing. Abuelo, will you teach us? Diego asked when they finally separated. Can we help you? I want to learn everything. Sophia nodded eagerly. And can we make videos together? I just want to spend time with you. I want to know everything about your life. Roberto showed them his workshop. Really showed them for the first time in years. He explained each project, each costume, each character story. Diego and Sophia listened with genuine interest, asking questions, touching fabrics, marveling at details. When Marcus and Zoe arrived for their afternoon session and found Diego and Sophia there, the workshop became even more alive. 5 people of 3 generations working together, teaching and learning from each other. Over the following weeks, Diego and Sophia came almost every day after school. Roberto taught them to use the sewing machine, to measure and cut fabric, to understand construction. Diego discovered he had patience for detailed work. Sophia had a natural eye for color and design. They also taught Roberto more about social media, about trends and hashtags and engagement. It was a fair exchange. Roberto taught them craftsmanship, history, and patience. They taught him technology, communication, and how to navigate this digital world. Here's something important about social media that even young people forget, Sophia explained one evening while helping her grandfather respond to comments. You don't have to reply to everything. And you should never respond when you're angry or hurt. Take time. Think about your words. Once something is posted online, it exists forever. My generation forgets this because Diego added his own wisdom. Also, Abuelo, don't compare yourself to others. That's the toxic part of social media. Constantly measuring your success against everyone else's. You have 800,000. Roberto absorbed these lessons, impressed by his grandchildren's thoughtfulness when they weren't distracted by their devices. As they worked together one afternoon, Roberto shared more practical knowledge while hemming pants for a client. If you need to hem pants but don't have a sewing machine, here's a trick. Use fabric tape and an iron. Place the tape between the folded hem. Iron it with high heat for 10 seconds. Later, while teaching Sophia to remove a stain from silk, he said, "For most fabric stains, mix equal parts white vinegar and water, dab gently." By summer 2020, Roberto's life had transformed so completely he barely recognized it. But the best transformation wasn't his follower count. It was what happened every afternoon in his workshop. Roberto's account surpassed 2 million followers by June. Content creators requested his costumes. He hired 2 assistants from the local fashion program. His small workshop expanded into the garage. But none of that mattered as much as hearing Sophia say, "Abuelo, what do you think of this color combination?" Or Diego saying, "Abuelo, teach me how to do French seams." One evening, as they cleaned up after a long day, Sophia asked, "Abuelo, how did you do it? You went from alone and depressed to famous and busy. How?" Roberto thought carefully. "I did not do it alone. Marcus and Zoe knocked on my door and gave me an opportunity. I had to choose to say yes, even though I was scared. Then they taught me things I did not know, and I taught them things." He paused, then continued, "But I want to tell you something important. You have nothing to apologize for. You are young. Young people should be looking forward, not back. I do not blame you for having your own lives. But I am grateful, so grateful, that you came back." "We should have come back sooner," Diego said quietly. "Maybe," Roberto agreed. "But if you had come back sooner, would I have been ready? If Marcus and Zoe had not knocked on my door, none of this would have happened. Sometimes we need to lose things to find them again in a new way. I lost you both for a while, yes." Sophia was crying again, but these were different tears. "Abuelo, thank you for not giving up. Thank you for opening the door when they knocked." Roberto held his granddaughter close. "Thank you for coming back," he whispered. "Thank you for seeing me again." As Roberto stood in his now bustling workshop, he thought about that version of himself from 9 months ago, sitting alone on New Year's Eve, crying in the dark. He wished he could tell that man what he knows now. By September 2020, Roberto's Vintage Culture had become more than just a TikTok account. It had become a movement celebrating traditional craftsmanship, intergenerational connection, and the idea that purpose can be found at any age. Roberto created a signature series of costumes, each telling the story of an immigrant to America, blending traditional clothing from their homeland with modern American elements. A dress representing his mother's journey from Cuba, a suit representing an Italian immigrant's experience. Each costume came with a researched historical story, honoring real experiences of real people. When a documentary filmmaker approached him about a project, Roberto agreed on condition that it focused not just on him, but on broader themes: craftsmanship, intergenerational connection, finding purpose at any age. The documentary, Never Too Late, the Roberto Gonzalez story, began filming in the fall. Through it all, Roberto continued sharing practical knowledge in his videos. He taught viewers how to repair torn seams properly. Thread your needle, not the end. Start stitching from the inside so the knot is hidden. Use small, tight stitches. Tiny stitches are always stronger than large ones. He showed how to fix a stuck zipper. Rub a graphite pencil along the teeth. The graphite acts as lubricant. Never use oil. It stains fabric. If pencil doesn't work, use a small amount of soap. But here's what you must never do. He demonstrated proper garment storage. Natural fabrics like wool and cotton need to breathe. Never store them in plastic bags. Use cotton garment bags or old pillowcases. Cedar blocks repel moths naturally. With his videos became beloved not just for fashion, but for life wisdom. People commented, "My grandmother used to tell me these things, and I forgot them all. Thank you. This man is teaching me more than how to sew. He's teaching me patience. I'm a 22-year-old guy, and I never thought I'd be." One particularly popular video addressed elderly people directly. If you are elderly and you feel forgotten, listen to me. You are not forgotten. The video went viral beyond TikTok, shared on Facebook by elderly users and their adult children. Roberto received thousands of messages from seniors saying they'd felt inspired to try something new, learning technology, restarting old hobbies, reconnecting with grandchildren. On New Year's Eve, 2020, exactly 1 year after that knock on the door, Roberto hosted a celebration in his expanded workshop. A celebration that proved how much 1 year, one choice, one open door could change everything. His sons came with their families. Diego and Sofia were there, of course, now skilled enough to help with actual projects. Marcus and Zoe brought friends from college. The 2 assistants attended. Neighbors dropped by. The small house that had been so silent and empty a year ago now overflowed with life and laughter. As midnight approached, Roberto stood on his back porch with Diego and Sofia, looking at the stars over Miami. Sofia leaned against his shoulder like she used to as a small child. Diego held his grandfather's hand. "Abuelo," Diego said, "what you've built this year is incredible. How did you do it?" Roberto thought about this carefully. "I will tell you the truth. On that New Year's Eve, I had almost given up. I felt like my life was over, like I had nothing left to offer. But I was wrong. I was not useless. I was just disconnected. My skills—" He paused, then continued. "At 74, I learned to use a smartphone, to understand social media, to teach in front of cameras. It was hard. Many times I wanted to quit because it was frustrating. But the alternative—" Sofia lifted her head. "But weren't you scared? Learning all that new technology when you'd never used it before?" "Terrified," Roberto admitted. "Every day I felt stupid and old and slow. But Marcus and Zoe were patient. They never made me feel bad for not knowing. And slowly I learned. Here is what I want you both to understand." His voice grew stronger. "But feeling invisible and being invisible are different things. I felt invisible, but I was never actually invisible. I just needed connection. That is what kills elderly people more than disease." Diego said quietly, "Do you think other elderly people could do what you did? Learn technology and find purpose again?" "Not everyone needs to become famous on TikTok," Roberto said with a laugh. "But yes, every elderly person has knowledge and skills that matter. Some know how to garden, some know how to cook traditional food, some know history." As fireworks began exploding over Miami, marking midnight and the beginning of 2021, the 3 of them stood together. Roberto thought about that version of himself from exactly 1 year ago, sitting in the dark, crying, feeling his life was over. He wished he could go back and tell that man, "Hold on. Just hold on a little longer. Something wonderful is about to knock on your door. And when it does, be brave enough to say yes." But he couldn't go back. None of us can. All we can do is move forward, stay open to possibility, remain brave enough to try new things even when we're scared, and remember that connection is always worth the effort, always worth the risk, always worth the discomfort of learning something new. Later that night, before sleeping, Roberto did something that had become his routine. He picked up his phone, still sometimes clumsy with it, but improving, and recorded a short message. "Hello, my friends. This is Roberto. 1 year ago tonight, I was alone, crying, feeling my life was over. Then he posted the video and put down the phone. Within minutes, comments appeared, hearts and encouraging words from people around the world, young and old, all connected by this simple message of hope and purpose. Roberto turned off the light and closed his eyes. Tomorrow, he would wake to a workshop full of projects, students eager to learn, grandchildren who loved him, and a life that still had so much left to offer. The rain had stopped falling on Miami, and stars shone bright over Little Havana. In a small yellow house on Calle Ocho, a 74-year-old tailor, no longer alone, no longer forgotten, no longer invisible, slept peacefully, proof that it is never, ever too late to begin again.